Well, hello once again. This is me, Leonard Wells, broadcasting as usual from HASLINGDEN, north of Manchester in the UK, on Thursday the 5th of January 2012. This is a replacement video in my series The United States of Europe. It's replacing the one I did on Switzerland, and for some inexplicable reason, which tends to happen when you get over 21 like me, I must have deleted. So I'm doing it again now, and it's quite interesting, Switzerland, because the Eurosceptics in the Conservative Party in the UK and in other parts of Europe are always pointing to Switzerland as a marvellous example to follow. Well, as it happens, by chance, coincidence, I was flying on Monday morning across the Alps on my way to Munich and then changing planes on to Manchester. And I was able to look down on the Alps, and I was thinking about how plate tectonics had pushed up the Alps when Africa, the plate on which Africa is carried on the mantle of molten liquid within the centre of the earth, and Africa pushed up against the European plate. In doing so, it swung Spain around, giving us the Bay of Biscay, and broke the land bridge between Africa and Spain. Breaking that land bridge allowed the Atlantic to flood in. At that time, millions of years ago, of course, the Mediterranean was dry, as was the Black Sea. The waterfall which resulted was the greatest that scientists can tell us has ever been on Earth. It took, nevertheless, 100 years to fill the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, changing history. And I was just thinking how very often it's geography, geology, something military, that has brought about all the different countries in Europe and given us these problems. It took millions of years to form the Alps, but we've only been really active, in a sense, for 2,000 years in Europe, during which time, since the time of Christ, we bumped each other off and butchered each other by the millions, in one senseless, useless war after another. Now Switzerland, because it's largely surrounded by mountains, a beautiful country, oh what a lovely place to visit, has chosen to stay separate from the rest of Europe. And in many ways it's very democratic, more so than in many countries. I mean, we think we're democratic in the UK, and the Eurosceptics are forever pointing to Brussels, saying, why should we listen to these people who were unelected? Well, our system of voting is so screwed up that in the county of Surrey, 50% vote Labour and 50% vote Conservative, and yet every single MP is a Conservative. Well, if that's democracy, I'm Chinese. And what has happened in Switzerland, they have this incredible referendum system, or referenda, or whatever the plural is, nobody knows really, for sure. And if enough people get together, they can vote on a subject, which then forces the government to do what that collection of people want. Quite remarkable, really. Because we all think of Switzerland, we think of cuckoo clocks and the Swiss Army knife. And there's a famous comedian in England, I've rather forgotten his name at the moment, but he's always referring to the Swiss Army with their Swiss knives, making a joke like scissors out, you know, and can opener at the ready, and that kind of silly thing. But Switzerland down the ages has stayed neutral from war, at least certainly it didn't get involved in the First or the Second World War, or any of the wars during the 20th century. Not only is Switzerland not in the EU, it's not in NATO, it doesn't use the euro, but it is in Schengen, which means it's part of the passport-free arrangements that occur within the Schengen agreement countries. Very useful, very handy. I mean, why should the Brits have to show their passports to get back into Britain when, for example, my girlfriend from Romania just has to show her ID card? Well, I had an ID card which the Labour government brought in. I paid £30 for it in good faith. Along came the Conservatives in May last year, and Mrs May stood up in Parliament and said, the ID card is finished and we won't give you your money back. Well, if that's an example of a Christian country, which Mr Cameron says we are, I'll eat my hat. Coming back to Switzerland, for most people, Switzerland is associated with secrecy and banking, because the laws in Switzerland were for many years so strict that if you walked into a bank and said, has Mr Jones next door to me got a bank account here, not only was it illegal for them to tell you that he had a bank account there, but it was illegal for them to tell you that he hadn't got, even if he didn't have a bank account there. So that's how strict it was. So of course it attracted a lot of funny money, to put it mildly, and has only recently began to start playing by the same rules as the rest of us. And at one time, of course, the Swiss had a system called a Swiss numbered account. This was prior to the war, and many Jewish families, anticipating what was coming with Adolf Hitler and his anti-Semitism, put their money into Swiss banks. As we understand from history, so did a lot of other people from around Europe. After the war, of course, when the families of those who had been killed in the Holocaust went to collect their money from the Swiss banks, they technically, quite rightly, asked for a death certificate if a relative had an account. But of course, knowing full well that the Germans didn't issue bank account death certificates for those that they had murdered. Very convenient, it's all very convenient. So the Swiss banks had billions of all kinds of currencies held in their accounts which nobody could get access to. And it wasn't until recently when groups of the families forced by law in America, forced the Swiss banks to make some kind of recompense. In addition, the Swiss banks were putting it about that if you didn't like paying taxes, Switzerland was a good place to put your money because they wouldn't tell anybody. And the story has it that every weekend, until quite recently, carloads of Italian businessmen with suitcases full of money, which they'd taken from their business, which they didn't want to pay Italian taxes on, they drove into Switzerland and put into accounts there. It got so bad, they got so much money coming into Switzerland at one time, that they had to bring in what was called negative interest accounts, so that if you put £100 in a bank account in Switzerland, you had to pay 3% interest charge to discourage people. Now, what has happened in Switzerland, the Swiss franc became very, very, very strong currency because of the fact that it had such a secure supply of funds. And it's only recently that the Americans have begun to force the Swiss, and has the EU begun to force the Swiss banks to start disclosing information about all those who don't like to pay taxes. Usually rich people. Strange, isn't it? But the law usually gets at poor people somehow or other to pay their taxes, but not the rich, because they can employ fancy, clever lawyers and accountants to find ways of getting around paying normal taxes. And companies do it too. It's that nobody likes paying taxes. That's a fact of life, I'm afraid. And no matter what laws you bring in, even if you threaten to execute people for not paying their taxes, people will still try. Anyway, to come back down to earth, the Swiss franc became so strong recently, in the past 6 months and even within the year, let's say, that their exports became uncompetitive. They were too costly. And they're finding that people don't want to go on holiday in Switzerland because the currency is so strong that they can't afford it. The hotels charge so much, as do the ski lifts and all the other things connected with winter holidays in Switzerland. So they've had to peg the Swiss currency against the euro at a lower figure than was natural. So it's all very well for people pointing at Switzerland as a good example to follow, but supposing things happen like that for the Swiss franc, for the pound. The pound at the moment is rising high against the euro. Now, if it reached the point where it wasn't competitive anymore, then some of these Eurosceptics would start thinking, well, maybe we should join the euro. Well, I believe we will one day. It makes a lot of sense. When I was flying the other day across from Romania to the UK, right across the whole of Europe and all the countries within the EU, as I flew across, I thought to myself, how sensible it is if 500 million people, and more if all the other countries join, if they all have the same currency. Because if you make washing machines, or as in Romania, Dacia motor cars, they can be very reasonably priced in other parts of Europe. But if we have 27 or 40 odd different currencies, all that happens is that the speculators sit there playing games with them. Or let's bet on the Swiss franc going up today, or the pound going down today against the Dutch mark, and so on and so forth. And half the people who are bleating and crowing that the euro is doomed are currency speculators. They don't like the euro because it cuts out a lot of things they can speculate. I mean, is that a way to make a living, gambling with other people's money? Do we really want those kind of people sitting on the outside of the fringes of Europe playing games with our money, playing a kind of lottery, like a Las Vegas setup? Well, there you have it. Switzerland doesn't use the euro. It's only in Schengen. It's not in NATO and it's not in the EU. Very good exports. It's well known for its machine tools, for example. Everybody finds it a beautiful country to travel in. They're wonderful at building railways, up mountains and through tunnels. They're building one at the moment, a great tunnel at the St. Gothard, which will allow travel much quicker from Switzerland through into Italy. Much quicker than that. They have a tunnel at the moment through the Alps, but it's a very steep climb to it. And they're building a longer tunnel lower down the mountain so that longer trains can go much faster through that tunnel, cutting the journey perhaps by an hour. So that's Switzerland. This is my dream, a United States of Europe. If we can have a United States of Europe, we have the prospect of 2,000 years of peace compared to the 2,000 years of butchery that have just gone past since the time of Christ. Do you know we have killed 100 million people in that 2,000 years? For what? The Americans spent billions bombing Germany flat during the Second World War and then had to spend billions to rebuild it. If we hadn't had all these wars, just think where we could have been by now. If we can have 2,000 years of peace ahead of us, we can have a golden age and we can give it to our children and grandchildren with joy in our hearts. One of the reasons why we're in such a pickle is because everybody in Europe sings from a different hymn sheet. And you can't really sing the Hallelujah chorus if you're all singing different tunes, or play the Ode to Joy for that matter together, if you don't have the same sheets of music. Well, that's it. God bless while it's still legal in the UK to say God bless. Take care and bye for now.